It's a fast moving month and a chance to do so many things, probably more than you'll have time for. So you need to select, and I'll give you some pointers here to help out. And I'm starting here deliberately because this is a good example of how things have happened so quickly in the last 2 months, really. Like the corn that looked like a little weed 2 months ago, and dahlias have sprung up from nowhere, the salvia, sunflowers that we planted, and the climbing beans. So a lot of vegetables at this time of year can be really beautiful, and do find time to enjoy the beauty of your garden in this lovely month. It's an odd thing that, in view of the lack of fine weather we've had, and in particular a lack of sunshine, and as I say that, the sun is just brightening a bit, but mostly the sky's been pretty grey, but we're running short of water for some of these plants because we've not had the rain. We've had the cloud but not the rain since mid-July. And one clue to plants needing water is, especially when they're a bit bigger, when you see the leaves wilting in the afternoon, such as the dahlia I was standing next to just now. You can see the tips are wilting mid-afternoon, and that's a sign that not that the plant's going to die or flop over, but that it will benefit from water if you have some spare water. So often it's a case of making choices. Plants I find that actually survive remarkably well, vegetables in particular, without water, are winter brassicas like kale. Plants you're going to pick later, in other words. You know, they can come through a surprising amount of dry weather and then pick up in hopefully some early autumn rain. You can't guess it, obviously, but if you haven't got the water, you haven't got it, so you will have to make some choices. I find also chard and beetroot are amazingly drought resistant. What you won't get though is the ongoing production if you want that. So that's where salad plants, for example, are the prime candidate for giving water to, because you want to be picking them all the time and you want nice tender leaves. So here, for example, we're watering lettuce at the moment. That's probably our main watering plant. And then we're also watering plants like celery that are mostly water. And celery will look okay if you don't give it water, but it gets very stringy. And then flowering plants, so flowering vegetables, that is, climbing beans, dwarf French beans. Flowering means that the flowers are turning into pods, the bits we eat, and giving water will really increase the harvest there. So that's already quite a few things. And then if you've got undercover space, you will want to be watering tomatoes, cucumbers, obviously, probably both of those in equal measure, because they're both doing so much at this time of year, both growing still strongly, as well as developing fruit, as well as ripening the fruits. And I'll give you some tips on that in a minute about how to pick them efficiently with less demand on the plant itself. And then related to all of those things is weeding, because if you have a lot of weeds in the ground, that's going to suck up a lot of water. And although you might hear it said that bare soil is not good because the sun hits it and it's sucking out the moisture, it's actually not true, I don't find. With no dig, you've got compost mulch on top, and that makes a soft, dry surface. The compost itself can dry sometimes, but that's protecting moisture underneath, and it makes a capillary boundary. You've got dry material on top of damper material below, and the water can't travel upwards through that boundary layer. So that keeps the moisture in there, such as it is. It doesn't mean the soil stays moist forever, because obviously plants, like say this sunflower, they're rooting very deeply, and so they are pulling out moisture, whatever your surface layer is. And actually, the beauty of this time of year with most vegetables, you have got a leaf cover more or less over the surface. And that's why it's good to have a few wood chips on the path, not too many, because that also helps to make a nice capillary there of dry surface material. So when you see a surface dry, it doesn't mean to say that you need to water, but removing weeds certainly helps. And best way to deal with weeds is actually remove them before they get big and take up the water. So stay on the front foot with that one and look for weeds when they're really small. A little bit of hoeing, scuffling the surface, whatever it takes, so that they will then dry and frazzle in sunshine like this very quickly. When they're small, they haven't got a very strong root system. On that same note, weeding around the edges of your plot, we call it edging, is very worthwhile because those weeds can be very strong, plants, grass, whatever, and spread in. That's a big job at this time of year. It doesn't take long. Just get in the habit of doing it little and often. And tidying is related to that as well. So tidying means removing leaves from plants, say, before they start to decay. Decaying leaves is not a sign the plant's in trouble or anything. It's just that any plant can only support so many healthy leaves. It's like all of our plants, depending how much space you've given them, depending what type of vegetable or flower they are, have a certain run of roots which can support a certain amount of leaves. That also is related to soil fertility and moisture. But more or less, if you see, you'll see it on lower leaves always. Look at your lower leaves of, say, kale or brassicas, lettuce, tomatoes, and that's where you'll start to see leaves decaying a bit, not dying off, but just losing colour, losing that lovely, healthy, strong green colour, lush growth that you see nearer the top of the plant. That's where you want it, because that's where a lot of photosynthesis is happening more than at the bottom, and that's why removing lower leaves is not damaging for plants. It's helping them to look nice, although they're not concerned about that. We are, but that's important too. But it means that they're just more concentrating their energy on maintaining and growing newer leaves near the top of the plant. So, for example, with Brussels sprouts, it doesn't take long. Again, just getting in the habit of it, regularly going through your plants and just snapping off those lower leaves is really worthwhile. And that also reduces habitat for pests like slugs. And then a result of all of this great work is all your damaged leaves that you've taken off and your weeds and any other debris you're finding in the garden can go on your compost heap, all of it. And another source of great composting material at this time of year is crop residues from harvest, so potatoes, for example. And it always amazes me how often I'm hearing that you can't compost potato tops or old potatoes and that kind of thing. You certainly can. That's all I can say from experience, and there's no reason why not, actually. There's some misunderstandings. People worry that blight spores will somehow survive in a compost heap, and they don't. They just can't. They need living material to survive on or in, and a compost heap makes quite short work of all that, even if it's not hot. You're more likely to get a hot compost heap if you add a lot of material, like all the things that you've been told you mustn't. So like weeds and weed roots, weed seeds, that's the one that does need heat though. But we're doing a lot of compost making at the moment, and if you can gather a few wastes from other spaces, like nearby waste ground, maybe cemeteries, wherever's near you that's got vegetation. Here we're adding a lot of grass mowings from around, so we've got a fantastic amount of green material. If we added only that, the compost heaps would get rather hot and soggy, and it's the latter of those two that I'd worry about. So that's where you need some woody material, or material of any woody origin. So that could be sieved old wood chip. That's what we're using. We put 8 to 10 month old wood chip through a standalone 12mm 1/2 inch sieve. Nice brown stuff comes out, the small stuff, and I'm using that as a brown 1/4 by volume to the 3/4 green. I've mentioned maybe half the jobs that you can be doing in August, and already that's quite a lot. It's not complicated, but it's a lot to do when everything's growing really fast, and every time you come out, something else is needing attention. And I want to cover next picking and how you harvest your plants, because there's many opportunities there for helping them to grow better for you. Picking in August of leafy vegetables like chard can be amazingly productive. Like one plant can give you so much, because with the warm soil and continuing decent temperatures and hopefully sufficient moisture and the productivity of these plants, that from one little clump, how many can you eat? So What I find is good to do is, if you can, it goes back to when you first plant, deciding how many to plant and how many you'll need. Hopefully not plant too many, but if you have got more plants than you need for your eating at the moment, it's still good to keep picking. We do that with most leafy vegetables here. When I say most, we don't quite get around to all of it. And in fact, this chard got away from me on this bed because it just kept being so productive. We were working our way up the bed to meet the orders of what I'm selling, and we never quite got to the end. So in fact, just a couple of days ago, I decided to cut the tops off the last few. And that's one way of very quickly taking away the excess and giving yourself a chance then to carry on picking the nicer, newer leaves. Regular picking is an opportunity also to remove older leaves like this. This is one we missed before. It's growing nearer the bottom of the stalk of the chard, and you can tell it's old because of its pale colour and it's starting to get attacked by slugs and pests. And that's a classic difference with a younger leaf which has more brightness and vigour. Oh, here's another older one actually, so that's interesting. I'm glad I spotted those two, because removing these will take a lot of moisture stress from the plant and reduce slug numbers, and then it also makes it easier to pick the good leaves that we want. And you can see that I'm picking these quite small. There's another older leaf. And why small? Well, because the smaller you pick them, the longer it takes them to regrow. You can also eat these leaves for salad as opposed to cooking. So chard does have many options, and to do with how you pick it and how it's going to regrow. And the other thing about picking regularly is you spot the weeds. So it's a chance to remove them. There's a buttercup, and when they're small like that, you can get out enough root that it will not regrow. There's, I'm not too sure what this one is actually, but I just about use my fingernails, so it's getting a trowel. And down here we have dandelion. That's got enough dandelion root out that it won't regrow. So picking is a chance to do all these other jobs as well, tidying up the plants and weeding, and it's fun. I was just finishing the picking here, and lo and behold, what do I see? Snail hiding on the, what was it? It was in a thick clump of leaves. That's another reason not to leave leafy plants unpicked for too long. So I'm actually going to pick that plant. Snails sometimes leave a bit of sort of residue on, but that can go in the compost bucket. In fact, both of it can. And you know, so it's weed free, pest free, ready to go again. And we'll start picking at the other end from now. Looking after all the greenhouse plants at this time of year is such a big job because they grow so fast and so regularly, and they don't stop growing, which is great. Although having said that, we've not had significant warmth here. Like today is 20 degrees centigrade, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the highest temperature. It might warm up a bit next week, I hope so, because that would help plants like, say, the aubergines over there, which actually I've picked only about 3 so far from quite a few plants in quite a warm greenhouse. And it's noticeable how the plants in here, the tomatoes in particular, have performed much better than in the polytunnel, just because of that extra bit of warmth. It's also interesting how this bed in the middle, I just can't resist it. I grow tomatoes here every summer. So this is year 12 of this soil growing tomatoes, same soil. Obviously I'm putting a bit of compost on top, but that's kind of not relevant to what I'm saying. It's the plants are rooting into the same soil every year. The soil organisms are fed by their microbes and some nutrients in the compost, but it's, yeah, it's generally I'm happy with what I'm seeing here, and I think it shows that in the UK at least, often what we're lacking is warmth for these warmth loving plants. So maintenance and picking. This one it's called Burner Rose, and I saved seed from it last year. It's growing differently to how it did last year. It's puzzling me. So there's one I'm picking. You can see that was ripe. You can also pick ones less ripe. I'm going to show you in a minute. But usually what I also do after picking is I look at the next leaf up from the truss, because it's probably not doing very much for the plant anymore. And then what I'm seeing here is surprising me. That looks quite like potato blight, but not in an aggressive spreading form. So if you see that on leaves that are dry and you can control the moisture, no need to panic. Just cut them off. And these do have particularly large leaves actually at the moment. So I'm just removing any I'm seeing there. That one's got a bit of similar sort of disease on it. But what's left on the plant as a whole is green, so that's fine. But also when you take leaves off, it's a chance to reduce the truss size if need be. I've done it already, so I'm not in this case, but what I'm looking for with these beef tomatoes, they don't grow well if you try and get too many fruits on one truss. So this is kind of yellow oxheart, Sonnenherz. And I'm actually, to harvest the fruit now, believe it or not, I'm going to cut this whole truss, because this is called breaking stage. When the plants are showing first colour, you know, this is actually more than breaking stage, they're kind of half ripe, or more than half ripe. They can easily finish ripening in the warmth of your house. Out of sunlight is best, rather than waiting for, let me see when there's one there that's gone a bit more ripe. They will go more like that, red and yellow, quite bright colours. And when you cut through one of these, you get beautiful rainbow colours in the middle and really superb flavour. So it's a lovely variety, and actually it means that if you look at quite a few of these trusses, like there's one that's just going yellow. So I'm not going to cut the whole truss there, I'll just take that one. What are you doing? Why am I doing this and not letting them ripen on the plant? It's only beef tomatoes I do this for. It's to reduce the stress and pressure on the plant to finish off that ripening, and even growing a bit the fruit, but mainly the ripening. And then it frees up energy, plant energy, for future growth of more tomatoes higher up. So that's what I'm looking at doing there. But it doesn't apply to cherry tomatoes. We pick them fully ripe because they do pick up that extra sweetness, which I really want for the cherry tomatoes, and that goes more quickly, I find. It's these beef tomatoes, it's especially in slightly cooler climates, beef tomatoes really need a lot of warmth. By late July, in a warm structure like this, melons could be coming to ripening point. It's surprising considering the weather we've had. Quality of soil, and we've looked after them carefully. These were sown late March, planted early May, and it's a variety called Emir. And look, it's ripe. And how do you know that? You can tell by the cracking around the stalk, and the colour has changed from green to yellow. And there's no net supporting them. You don't need to believe that story you will have heard about. They need support. They would fall off eventually if you would let them get really ripe. I just wanted to mention though that these plants have got a kind of anthracnose. It's a very, I don't think it's an important disease, but it's just getting towards the end of their life. They've got to succumb to something maybe a little bit earlier than they would have. And it means these melons, although they're delicious, they're tasting not quite as sweet as they would have if the leaves had stayed green. And in fact, the leaves are staying green on the melon plant up here, where, interesting, it's less ventilation up this end. But you can see there's some beautiful big melons in there. I think there's two. There's a third one actually, no, there's another one there. So the leaves are hiding them quite nicely, and I'm just leaving them there to do their own thing. And also here, you might have noticed this plant is holy basil, and the flavour's amazing. Basil's maybe not quite the right word for it. It grows rather like a basil. It likes warmth, so it's full of aroma and flavour and goes well with many dishes. Pests like slugs have caused many problems this year, and I know from what I hear and see that many of you have suffered equally. If you're in a damp climate, and there's more damp climates in 2024 than there were previously. And here is a good example, because, I should say bad example, there's quite a lot of edges, and that's where they hide. Like, we recently cut down the nettles in that far corner, but they were definitely sheltering or giving habitat to quite a few snails that would come out, and they demolished those cabbages. At first I thought it was caterpillars, it was such a clean damage, but it turns out it was mollusks. And then here, I was quietly confident because the weather had improved a bit, and I planted 9 white sprouting broccoli plants. And before I knew it, there were only 4 left, and they looked pretty weak, and I wasn't sure they were going to make it. So I planted the whole area with beetroot. Beetroot are more resistant to slugs and snails, as you can see by how they've all survived. So what am I going to do? I've got 2 plants in one place, and I might well take out some of the beetroot on that corner. I'd still quite like to have some sprouting broccoli. It would sprout next spring, and in fact 4 plants like that could fill this whole space, and it might be the simplest long-term solution, but still keep a few beetroot here for autumn harvests. And then there, a similar note, but it's flies, carrot root flies. So I've sown carrots and they did come up. I'm pleasantly surprised by that. And they're looking good, but I'm going to cover them very soon with hoop and mesh over against carrot root fly. That's a good job to do before the 2nd week of August, when the flies start flying again. You should be all right at the moment with carrots. The carrot root flies are not flying in the middle of summer. So there's a period of grace there between the 2 hatchings, which are spring and autumn. Also going on here is some mildew on the cucumbers. I'm going to cut that out and just keep on top of that. Those cucumbers have been in the ground quite a long time, still not cropping, not warm enough, but they might in August, I'm hoping. Haven't given up hope there. And the plants actually look respectable, at least. This time last year they were just giving so many. And likewise, the tomatoes in that corner, really slow, and yet they've grown a lot. And that's something else I'm noticing, is the disproportionate balance of fruit and stem. I don't know quite what that's all about, and I'm running out of options. I'm actually going to take out the tops, and you could do that very soon, of outdoor tomatoes to encourage the fruits to develop. So stop the plants at the top, don't let them grow any more shoots, and side shoots included, and then they put all their energy into whatever fruits there are. And August is a great month for keeping sowing and planting. So you're going to have these spaces, and it's like here where it was great to have a few spare beetroot plants. You know, they would have ended up in the compost heap otherwise, but wow, what a nice way to fill up the space. So you will have quite a few spaces coming in August from all the things I've talked about, mainly harvesting. And good things to sow in the first half of August. There's one beautiful vegetable in particular is spinach, as in true spinach, not leaf beet spinach. Up to about the middle of August is about right. Say colder climates on the 1st of August, warmer climates middle of August. Why August, not July? Well, if you sow too much into July, it's still summer. It can overlap with their flowering season. It makes them think they've had summer and then they're going to bolt. So what we want is slow, steady growth through the autumn, winter and next spring. Very hardy plant spinach. Here my best sowing date is between the 5th and the 12th of August, for example. Salad rocket and mustards, all the oriental leaves, you can sow them from the 1st week of August. So sow them in early August, you get wonderful harvest through the autumn. Probably won't survive the winter outside, but you could sow later for growing under cover. And that's about it in terms of new vegetables to sow in early August, but towards the end of August you could sow spring cabbage and spring onions to overwinter. And they're not going to make harvest this autumn, but they will overwinter as small plants to crop next spring. So on that rather sobering note, we're thinking already of next spring, and that's how it should be though. You know, a lot of what you do in August is not only about August and perhaps September, but it's about looking after your garden in a way that keeps it cropping and productive and healthy, and keeps the soil nice and happy as we go through the rest of the seasons of the year, even into next year.